frankly, I think we ought to be suing Dominion voting machines. We ought to be getting our money back and starting over with a secure way of doing things and put more power back into the hands of these local jurisdictions.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at the New American Magazine. We have a very special guest with us today, Georgia Senator Colton Moore. He is leading the charge right now to hold prosecutor Fani Willis accountable. She's the one who brought the indictments against Donald Trump and 18 of his associates. Senator Moore was born and raised on a farm in Dade County, Georgia. He lives there today. He has been interested in politics for a very long time. He served as the state president of Georgia Future Business Leaders of America, and that was back in 2012. And during that time, he led more than 25,000 students and 320 advisors. At age 18, he started as a commercial truck driver and did auctioneering while he was studying at the University of Georgia, graduated from there with a double bachelor's in political science and international affairs. And today he represents about 200,000 Georgians in the state Senate at the 53rd District. And he is now at the forefront of pushing back against what he describes as the persecution of Donald Trump. Senator Moore, welcome to the program. It is great to have you here. You're asking right now for a special session for the legislature to be reconvened to investigate and deal with this prosecutor who has brought indictments against Donald Trump and 18 others. Talk to us about why you think that's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we all learn in elementary education about our government is that we have three branches of government, right? I serve in the legislative branch as a senator, like you said, representing about 200,000 constituents. And that legislative body has a lot of authority. And when it comes to oversight and checks and balances. So right now in the state of Georgia, we have a district attorney who has filed charges, the RICO charges that you would see against a mafia, trying to say that Donald Trump and 18 other people, obviously, which many of them he doesn't even know, are guilty of crimes that they could spend the rest of their life in prison for. And the only evidence held against some of them is nothing more than a tweet. These individuals were questioning the integrity of an election, no different than Stacey Abrams or Hillary Clinton. They were treated like Americans. But these individuals who have been indicted are being treated very un-American because they have a First Amendment right to question the integrity of an election, but now they've been taken political prisoner. What does that do? Well, that creates a big chilling effect on freedom of speech with a lot of my fellow legislators. They're too afraid to speak out because they're worried that they may find themselves in peril of the judicial system, that they may find themselves as obstructionists to justice. And that's why I say that we have a complete constitutional crisis here in Georgia. When members of the Republic who are duly elected by their constituencies to represent them and be a voice for them are too afraid to speak out because they're worried they may find themselves in legal heat. It's a very dangerous situation that we have. I mean, one of my fellow senators is being indicted in this. Another is a co-conspirator. And the governor even has the ability, considering the charges that have been filed against them, to appoint a panel and have them removed from office. So if this judicial branch of government is in the posture to remove senators from their position, then we have a big problem. And that's why I'm calling for an emergency special session. Now, what do we do in that emergency special session? Well, the first thing I would hope to do would be to defund Fani Willis of any of my hardworking constituents' taxpayer money. I mean, my constituents work hard every day. They sweat for that tax money. And they don't want to see it being used to take on and prosecute people that are questioning the integrity of an election. Meanwhile, this district attorney very failed in her normal role and duty when the ACLU is reporting that half of the inmates in her jail have yet to be charged with a crime. You've got people dying just as of yesterday, some of which have died of bed bugs, literally eaten alive by bed bugs. So Eighth Amendment violations going on in her jail. But yet crime is on the rise, and she's not focused on providing justice to anyone. Instead, she's focused on making political prisoners. So that's kind of an urgent call to my fellow legislator to ask the governor to call a special session and do it immediately.
Yeah, and there's so much to this case. In fact, earlier today, I was speaking with Garland Favorito, and he says some of the statements that the prosecutor alleged were false were actually true. In some cases, the situation was even worse than these statements alleged, these statements that are being criminalized. Obviously, this is of national significance because we're talking about the leading political candidate in the 2024 presidential election. This is hugely serious. So defunding her efforts, that's one thing, but beyond that, what do you think needs to happen at a systemic level? One of the things that Garland
we need an
mentioned,
investigation. We need a system investigation. The legislature has the authority through the ethics commission on both chambers and to have subpoena power, to subpoena documents, to subpoena people, and we need to be using that where there's a lot of questions that haven't been answered. Why in the world were these indictments released before the grand jury ever concluded? Some would say that perhaps the district attorney was doing some judge shopping when that maneuver was made. Very scary. So we as a legislature, we've got a constitutional duty to provide oversight. And right now, the posture of the General Assembly is, well, let's just say we have separation of powers and let's look the other way. And they're completely forgetting about the checks and balances that we provide on other agencies of government.
Yeah. And so now some of the federal lawmakers are looking into this as well. As you know, some members of Congress are also taking a look at this prosecutor here. What are your thoughts on the congressional probe that's going to be launched? Do you think that may lead to something productive? And
well, I'm so excited that they're doing it. I mean, I couldn't be more proud of Representative Andy Biggs and Representative Jim Jordan for taking this on. It's frankly embarrassing to the Georgia legislature that we're letting Congress be more efficient than we are at diving into this problem. I hope that they're able to subpoena and uncover some evidence that hopefully will, garner the confidence of some of my other fellow legislators to decide to take action.
And when we get to the other side of the break, I want to ask you about more systemic reforms. But in the meantime, I mean, you've called this political persecution. And you mentioned, and several other people I've spoken to have also mentioned that there's a real fear in Georgia right now of speaking out because other people may be indicted. What has gone wrong? How did we get to the point where this is even happening?
Well, we've been asleep at the wheel. And if, not to speak is to speak. And that's the problem, is too many legislators are hiding under their desk and they're not willing to speak out. I mean, freedom is only one generation away. That's it. And, Ronald Reagan said that. He also said, if they can't see the light, give them the heat. And that's what I'm doing right now is continuing the push for this special session, calling on grassroots across the state to demand of your state senator and your state representative that they call a special session to investigate Fani Willis.
So before we go to break, what's the process for that? You mentioned the governor could call one. If the governor refuses, is there a way for lawmakers to do this on their own?
Yeah, it takes 3/5 of the lawmakers. The governor could call the session right now if he wanted to. He had a press conference earlier today and indicated that he wasn't going to. He kind of almost just spoke in favor of Fani Willis and what she was doing. And that's where I kind of think we're kind of getting almost into like a Nazi Germany type situation where first they come after your enemies and people don't say anything because they're your enemies, right? And I kind of feel like that's where our governor is right now. I think he looks at Donald Trump as an enemy, so he's not going to speak out. Well, then they come after your friends. And I feel like that's where we are as a legislature. Our legislature, we've got friends that are being indicted, but yet we say, oh man, look at what they're doing to my enemies. I'm not really going to speak up for my friends. I'm kind of afraid. Well, then they come after you. And at that point, there's no one left to speak up for you. And what do? Well, you lose your freedoms. You get sent to the gulag. And we're losing our freedoms right now in our state. And that's why it's so critical, so important that this fight continue with vigor.
Yeah, and the whole country is watching. Folks, stay with us. We're going to go to break real quick. We're going to come right back and talk more with Senator Moore about systemic reforms that could be explored in Georgia that might be a model for the nation. We'll be right back.
Here's the news, Dad.
Is it, son? Is it?
What about this one, Dad?
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days. There's just too much baloney out there. At the New American, they cut through the baloney and give me the truth.
The truth is hard to find, but the New American has it. Check it out at thenewamerican.com.
Senator Moore, earlier today, I mentioned I was speaking with Garland Favorito, and there are others in Georgia who are now saying that really there needs to be some systemic reforms here, beyond just this one rogue prosecutor and what she's up to. One of the things that Favorito said was that the whole grand jury process now in Georgia is completely controlled by prosecutors. Citizens are not able to come in and present evidence. Prosecutors can basically hide evidence. They can mislead grand jurors. And of course, that wasn't always the case, right? Even long before official prosecutors, there was grand jury processes where citizens could come and present evidence. Do you believe that there's a need for systemic reforms when it comes to prosecutions, district attorneys, grand juries, and criminal indictments?
Absolutely. I would challenge anyone to read the book, The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates. We obviously have this problem in Georgia. I have constituents who, they've signed affidavits of election fraud. They've seen election fraud, and they've tried to present evidence to a grand jury, and a grand jury in Georgia has jurisdiction across the state when it comes to investigating certain things. But the district attorneys have always turned them down. All they want to do is get to the chairman of that jury and say, hey, let me please present my case to you. And the district attorney says, you get out of here, or we're going to have you charged with the contempt of court. There's a special grand jury in Georgia, and that special grand jury has been weaponized as it has, is being seen in this Donald Trump case with these 19 others indicted, right? Where they go in and a special grand jury, it's not a criminal grand jury, but they get these people under oath talking about something else. And then they, turn that around and make a crime of it. And then bring those same statements or those same people back into a criminal grand jury. So there ought to be a separation between the special grand jury and the criminal grand jury, but there also should be a special grand jury that any citizen can go to and have their grievances addressed. And if you've never read the book, The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates, it talks very plainly on how that system works.
Yeah, and historically, that's what we had in the United States long before we had quote unquote professional law enforcement. Citizens could go to grand juries. They could present evidence, and then grand juries could act as appropriate. Senator Moore, I want to ask you about the election too, and I don't want to get you in any trouble with Miss Willis there, but do you have confidence in the election? And I guess none of this really would probably be happening if there were paper ballots and everything could just be recounted. But are you confident in election integrity in Georgia? Do you feel everything is above ground, or do you see any room for reforms that might increase confidence and trustworthiness in the elections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have confidence in the election system right now, frankly, because, look at the Haldeman report. It comes out, Dominion voting machines need to be updated in the state of Georgia. There's vulnerabilities. It's been highlighted in this report. Georgia is the only state in the union that every single precinct uses Dominion voting machines. Okay, our Secretary of State has refused to update those machines. Our lieutenant governor has chased him down. Our Senate leadership has had meetings with Dominion. They have yet to update those machines. It's ridiculous. I've heard excuses like, well, if we update them, you crazies are just going to say we're rigging the election. Well, no one's filed to run just yet. So go ahead and update the machines, and you can't have the argument that you were rigging the elections by plugging a flash drive into it. When it comes to the Dominion voting machines in Georgia, and in Georgia, the Secretary of State has full jurisdiction across the state when it comes to the elections. We voted on the machines when I was in the House. There was probably about 20 Republicans who were reluctant. And the pitch was made from the Secretary of State's office that these are, you can't mess with these machines. It'll be so pure of an election. Well, how will it be a pure election? Well, there'll be 3 counts of the vote so that we can always audit. Well, what are the 3 counts? Well, they would say, well, when you press the machine, that's the first count. Then it prints off a piece of paper. You look at the piece of paper, that's the second count. And then you put it into a machine, and that's the third count. And all 3 of those counts should always match up. The problem is when people have went back and tried to match up those 3 counts, there's always been some red tape in the way. In some cases, Dominion goes, well, that's proprietary information. We can't talk about that. So I believe it's Spalding County here in Georgia that the election commission has said, hey, we're only going to count those pieces of paper that people can independently audit themselves. And we're not even going to worry about the rest of the machine. So, when it comes to election integrity, that seems like the appropriate way to do things. The problem is our legislative intent in voting for those Dominion voting machines has not been upheld. So frankly, I think we ought to be suing Dominion voting machines. We ought to be getting our money back and starting over with a secure way of doing things and put more power back into the hands of these local jurisdictions.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting. A video just recently emerged of the governor himself, Governor Brian Kemp, confronted by a couple of guys from Georgians for Truth, admitting on camera that really people can hack voting machines. So the governor of Georgia knows this, the people know this, and yet not even supposed to talk about it without risking indictments. Senator Moore, Donald Trump has highlighted your efforts. Writing on Truth Social, he called you the highly respected Georgia senator, says you deserve the thanks and congratulations of everyone for having the courage and conviction to fight the radical left lunatics who are so badly hurting the great state of Georgia and the USA itself. He also pointed out that this particular prosecutor is allowing violent crimes to go unpunished. All the evidence that was presented of election problems, no investigation, no punishment. What's your message to other lawmakers, to Americans more broadly? I mean, you're obviously in the national spotlight right now. Yeah. What's your message to Americans and to other lawmakers about where we are as a nation, where we need to go?
Yeah, I mean, for those who look at this as solely about Donald Trump, and there are Democrats who just say, oh, you just love Donald Trump, and there are Republicans who hate Donald Trump and say, oh, you're just fighting for Donald Trump. This is so much bigger than the president of the United States. This is about fundamental, basic American freedoms. Regardless of whether you're Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, it doesn't matter who you are. We are Americans, and we have a right to voice an opinion, especially when it comes to petitioning our government, right? These individuals were questioning the integrity of an election, and regardless of whether they were right or wrong, they got a right to question the integrity of an election, and now they've been taken political prisoner, which chills free speech across the board. We are absolutely in a constitutional crisis here in Georgia, and that's why we've got so many Americans watching what's going on right now. And I don't know where it's going to end. The passions are extremely high, but I certainly think that virtue is on our side in this debate.
Yep. I agree with you, Senator. We're down to just a couple of minutes left, but in an ideal world, where does this all go, Senator Moore? Where do we end up after this constitutional crisis? And how can everyday Americans watching this program help bring that about, whether they live in Georgia or making reforms in their own state?
Well, if you want to help me in this fight in Georgia right now, you can go to coltonmoore.com/emergency, and you can sign on to the official petition there, learn more information about what we've got going on here in Georgia. If you'd be willing to donate, that would certainly help fuel the fire right now, because I am in a legislative fight of my life. I've got legislators who are just absolutely refusing to call for a special session, even though their constituents are demanding it. We're sending out text messages across the state to these Senate districts and representatives districts where these people are being reluctant to take the side of freedom, and they're standing on the side of Fani Willis and this authoritarian regime. So any contribution that you can give will certainly help in that fight. If you're in the state of Georgia and you're watching this show, I would just encourage you to double down. Call your representative, call your senator again, and say, take action. I want to hear my voice through you as my representative calling for a special session to defund and investigate Fani Willis. I would encourage anybody else to make sure you're praying. Pray for this nation. Our liberties are at stake, and if we lose them, we will never get them back.
Senator Colton Moore of Georgia, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for what you're doing. Really, really appreciate your efforts for election integrity, for justice, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Alex. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. All righty, folks. That was Senator Colton Moore. Get involved here. Pray. And, folks, this is a national issue. It looks like a Georgia issue. It is obviously national. And this is going to affect every one of us over the long term. So get involved. Thanks for watching. Share this video out. Until next time, God bless you all.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement. Join with us. United, we will defend our rights. We are all Americans. We are the John Birch Society.